So there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out about Star Wars thanks to Bob Iger's book. And man, some of this is really eye-opening. So Ichibaka, great researcher. He's on Twitter. Give him a follow. I'll also link his WordPress blog here. Normally I wouldn't use a blog, but Ichibaka's really good. He's a really good researcher. Way better than a lot of the other outlets people use like CBR. Way better, 10 times better. So I'll link his blog. Check it out if you want. He's got a lot of really interesting stuff about Star Wars. But he sent me this stuff, and I figured it'd be good to go over because it brings a lot of really interesting stuff out of Bob Iger's book. So if you didn't know, Disney owns Star Wars, unfortunately. And George Lucas did have an outline for a trilogy that probably would have blown away what we've gotten. Unfortunately, we didn't get those. Disney decided they were going to go in a new direction, and here we are. Here we are. A disaster of a franchise now. Who knows what it would have been? I wonder, will we ever see George's outline? Probably not. I would hope one day maybe they release it just for kicks, but it's a damn shame we didn't get it. I bet you it'd have been exactly what fans would have wanted. So let's go over this a little bit. So he says here, George Lucas's Fandom Menace. If you didn't know, that's a movement. It's a bunch of Star Wars channels that kind of rise up against Disney. I'm friends with a lot of them. Good group of guys. And they do good work. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look what's going on. So these are taken from Bob's book. They've been outlined on this Reddit post. There's a link here. I'm going to have this linked in the description if you want to go through all of this. But here's what it is. So on George sending his outlines for the sequel trilogy, at some point in the process, George told me that he had completed outlines for 3 new movies. He agreed to send us 3 copies of the outlines, one for me and one for Alan Braveman and one for Alan Horn, who'd just been hired to run our studio. Alan Horn and I read George's outlines and decided we needed to buy them, though we made it clear in the purchase agreement that we would not be contractually obligated to adhere to the plot points he's laid out. So we know that didn't happen, though we don't even know if they used any of it because, well, obviously we haven't seen them. Like I said, I really hope that one day we get to see those outlines. I mean, they could put them in a book and sell it for $100. That book would be a bestseller. Moving on George's new role of creative authority. He knew that I was going to stand firm on the question of creative control, but it wasn't an easy thing for him to accept. I mean, can you blame him? I mean, this is his baby. But I don't feel too bad for him because he sold it. I mean, he could have kept it, raked in the money, but he got rid of it. So it's really, all of the destruction to Star Wars that he's witnessing, and he's not happy with the films. We know he's not happy with the films. He didn't have very many things to say on a kind note to Force Awakens and a few other things. But I don't feel too bad for him because he sold it. He didn't put any stipulations in there that could have kept any kind of control for himself. He let it all go to a soul-sucking company like Disney. I mean, what do you think was going to happen, George? So anyway, and so he reluctantly agreed to be available to consult with us at our request. I promised that we would be open to his ideas. This was not a hard promise to make, of course. We would be open to George Lucas's ideas. But like the outlines, we were under no obligation. But you were open to his ideas, but, you weren't going to use them. So dumb. You really should have used... Imagine if they'd used those outlines. George is a terrible director, but he's a great ideas man. The best movies under his guidance were Empire, Return of the Jedi. Other people directed them. Those were great movies. The first one, A New Hope, was good, but the sequel trilogy, not so much. I really wish other people would have directed them. The problem with George Lucas is he surrounds himself with yes men, and when you do that, it never works out very well. So here's something that's really interesting. On revealing to George they weren't following his plot outlines. Early on, Kathy brought JJ and Michael Arnett up to Northern California to meet with George at his ranch and talk about their ideas for the film. George immediately got upset as they began to describe the plot, and it dawned on him that they weren't using one of his stories he submitted during the negotiations. I mean, can you blame him? But like I said, he knew what he was doing. He sold everything to a soul-sucking company, and they have literally sucked the soul out of Star Wars. They've destroyed it, to be honest. And I don't know if it'll ever rebound, to be honest. I don't know. On George seeing The Force Awakens for the first time, just prior to the global release, Kathy screened The Force Awakens for George. He didn't hide his disappointment. There's nothing new, he said. In each of the films in the original trilogy, it was important for him to present new worlds, new stories, new characters, and new technologies. In this one, he said, there wasn't enough visual or technical leaps forward. He wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't appreciating the pressure we were under to give fans a film that was quintessentially Star Wars. We'd intentionally created a world that was visually and tonally connected to the earlier films to not stray too far from what people loved and expected. And George was criticizing us for the very thing we were trying to do. Looking back with the perspective of several years and a few more Star Wars films, I believe JJ achieved the near impossible, creating a perfect bridge between what had been and what was to come. However, in my opinion, weren't his outlines the same thing? Now, from what I hear, in an old Mark Hamill interview, I think this was around the time when Force Awakens came out, or a little bit beforehand, George was already talking about making another trilogy, and he had already contacted Mark Hamill about it, and I would link it if I could remember where it was from, so you have to take my word for it, but he did say this. He said, how would you like to come back and be a mentor? You would be the Obi-Wan this time. And he was open to that. So who knows where it would have been. Just maybe, we would have got what we all wanted to see, which is Luke Skywalker, Master Jedi, training a bunch of Jedi, rebuilding the Jedi Order, and, a new thing rising up. Instead, we got what we got. But regardless, he wasn't wrong about Force Awakens. I remember him saying in an interview, fans are going to love it, something like that. But, there's not really anything new here. And there wasn't. It was pretty much a ripoff of A New Hope. It really was. And then The Last Jedi was, well, I'm not even going to get into that one because the movie was so terrible. At least in my opinion. I hated it. I've seen some people come in the comments on previous videos and defend it, but not many. I think for the most part, Star Wars fans don't like that movie. They don't like it. So, another interesting thing that came out is that they almost had George sign an agreement where he wasn't allowed to talk bad about Star Wars. And that would have been really interesting because he hasn't really said anything too bad. He's been pretty quiet about it. A few little comments here and there about Disney. When he called them white slavers, I thought that was pretty damn hilarious. But they almost got him to sign an agreement where he couldn't say anything. And he didn't sign it. He said, even though he had issues with the film, I thought it was important for George to be at the Force Awakens premiere. He didn't want to come at first, but Kathy, with the help of George's now wife Melody Hobson, convinced him it was the right thing to do, and that before everything closed, they almost got him to agree in writing not to criticize the story. I asked George to agree that he wouldn't publicly criticize any of the Star Wars films that they made. When I brought it up to him, he said, I'm going to be a big shareholder of Walt Disney Company. Why would I disparage you or anything you do? You have to trust me. He took him at his word. Now, of course, he has made little sly comments here and there since then, but nothing too critical, though I would love to hear what he really thinks about what Disney's been doing to his baby. I'd be willing to bet they wouldn't be very nice words. I'd bet they would be very, very choice words because there's no way he's enjoying what's going on here. Imagine being George Lucas and hearing about how fandom is divided, how you have like a large segment of your audience, people that used to be united in their love for what you've created, have now pretty much split. Where everyone was arguing about what was in, the special edition, now people are just pretty much walking away from the franchise. There's never been anger like this towards Star Wars. And, that franchise managed to go decades without new movies and stayed relevant and loved and discovered by new generations of children without any new material. And now In a little short time span, Disney has managed to make Star Wars far so down the ladder that they can't even fill a theme park dedicated to the franchise. They can't even sell merchandise. Toys are on clearance. They can't even sell video games. The brand is dead. And I just don't see it coming back. I really don't, especially as they step away from the Skywalker brand. I mean, how are you going to do this without Skywalker? I don't know. Anyway, I thought this was some informative stuff. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe. Share the video. Hit that notification bell. And I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.